There's a fruit sitting in almost every kitchen in America right now that's quietly doing more to spike your blood sugar than a can of soda. And it's probably not the one you'd guess. Welcome back to Medical Insight, where we take the numbers, tests, and terms your doctor rarely has time to fully explain and break them down in plain English. Today, we're ranking 7 common fruits, worst to best for blood sugar. But before we get into the ranking itself, there's a mistake almost every fruit ranking online makes. And once you understand it, you'll see why the fruit everyone assumes is the worst might actually be one of the safest choices on this entire list. Most fruit rankings you'll find online rely on something called the Glycemic Index. And this is exactly where most of them quietly get it wrong. Glycemic Index measures how fast a food raises your blood sugar, but it says nothing about how much sugar you're actually getting in a real portion. That distinction matters more than almost anything else on this list. Think of it like the difference between how fast a car accelerates and how far it actually travels. Glycemic Index tells you the acceleration. Glycemic load tells you the distance, factoring in exactly how much carbohydrate is actually in a normal serving of that fruit. A fruit can accelerate blood sugar quickly, but barely move it overall, simply because there isn't much sugar packed into the portion you'd realistically eat. Harvard Health Publishing has specifically pointed to glycemic load as a more accurate measure of real-world blood sugar impact than glycemic index alone, precisely because it accounts for actual portion size rather than just speed. Watermelon is the perfect example, and it's exactly the fruit most rankings get wrong. Its glycemic index sits in the 70s, technically higher than table sugar, which is exactly why so many lists rank it as one of the worst fruits you can eat. But watermelon is roughly 90% water, meaning a typical serving contains very little actual carbohydrate. Once you calculate the glycemic load, accounting for that low carbohydrate density, watermelon drops to one of the lowest scores of any common fruit. Banana tells the opposite story. Its glycemic index looks only moderate, nothing alarming on paper. But a banana packs a meaningfully higher amount of actual carbohydrate into a normal serving, especially as it ripens. Once you calculate the glycemic load, banana ends up with one of the highest scores on this entire list, despite looking far less dangerous than watermelon based on index alone. So here's the FOMO worth sitting with. If you've ever avoided watermelon because you heard it was bad for blood sugar, while reaching for a banana as the safe choice, you may have had it backwards the entire time, and you're far from alone, since most rankings never make this distinction clear in the first place. Here's a question worth answering honestly before we get into the actual countdown. If someone asked you right now which of these 2 fruits was worse for blood sugar, watermelon or banana, which one would you have guessed? Number 7, the worst spot on this list goes to the ripe banana. And this is where the glycemic load story really earns its place at the top of this video. A banana isn't a fixed thing nutritionally. As it ripens, the resistant starch inside it, a starch your body can't break down quickly, gradually converts into simple sugar. A firm, green-tipped banana behaves very differently in your bloodstream than the same banana 3 or 4 days later, once the skin has gone soft and spotted. By the time it reaches that fully ripe stage, most of the resistant starch has already converted, and what's left is a fruit carrying one of the highest glycemic loads of anything on this entire list, verified across standard glycemic load data covering common fruits. This is exactly why banana earns the worst spot, not because of anything alarming about the fruit itself, but because of how much actual carbohydrate a typical ripe banana delivers in one sitting, especially compared to fruits like watermelon that looked far more suspicious on paper but carry a fraction of the real load. None of this means banana needs to disappear from your kitchen. It means the ripeness stage matters more than most people realize, and pairing it with something that slows absorption, a spoonful of nut butter or a boiled egg, makes a real difference in how your body handles it. Eating a fully ripe banana alone first thing in the morning on an empty stomach is exactly the scenario where its glycemic load hits hardest. Here's a question worth being honest with yourself about. Think about the banana sitting in your kitchen right now, or the one you usually reach for. Is it typically firm and slightly green, or is it the soft, heavily spotted kind that most people actually prefer to eat? Number 6, mango. Mango carries one of the more nuanced spots on this list, and it's worth understanding both sides honestly. On the glycemic load side, mango sits solidly in the moderate range, higher than fruits like apple or blueberries, though not as high as ripe banana. A typical serving delivers a meaningful amount of sugar, which is exactly why mango can genuinely move your blood sugar if eaten in large amounts, especially on its own. But mango isn't just sugar. It carries real nutritional value that shouldn't get lost in a conversation focused purely on blood sugar. Mango is a strong source of vitamin C, and it contains carotenoids, the orange plant pigments tied to genuine antioxidant benefits. These aren't minor nutritional footnotes. They're legitimate reasons mango has earned its reputation as a nutrient-dense fruit, even while carrying a moderate high glycemic load. This is exactly the balance worth understanding rather than avoiding entirely. A large bowl of chopped mango eaten alone will move your blood sugar meaningfully. A smaller portion, a handful of slices, alongside a meal that already contains protein or fat, is a very different experience for your body, since that pairing slows down how quickly the sugar actually hits your bloodstream. So mango isn't a fruit to fear, but it is one where portion size genuinely matters more than it does with some of the lower load fruits later on this list. Here's a question worth thinking about honestly. When you eat mango, is it usually a small handful alongside something else, or a full bowl eaten on its own? Number 5, pineapple. Pineapple sits in a similar middle ground to mango, though its story is a little different. Its glycemic load lands moderate, driven mostly by natural sugar content, with a modest amount of fiber helping to soften the impact somewhat compared to fruits with no fiber at all. Fresh pineapple, eaten in reasonable portions, is a genuinely manageable choice for blood sugar, especially alongside a meal that already includes some protein or fat to slow things down further. The real problem shows up once pineapple gets processed. Canned pineapple, particularly packed in syrup, adds extra sugar on top of what the fruit already carries naturally. Pineapple juice goes a step further, stripping out the fiber entirely, which removes the one factor that was helping buffer the sugar's impact in the first place. Once that fiber is gone, the sugar reaches your bloodstream far faster than it would from the whole fruit. This is exactly the pattern worth remembering, not just for pineapple, but for nearly every fruit on this list. Fiber is doing real work behind the scenes, and processing a fruit, whether through juicing, canning in syrup, or blending, tends to strip that work away while leaving the sugar fully intact. So the honest version is simple. Fresh pineapple, a reasonable portion, ideally alongside a meal, is a fruit you don't need to avoid. Canned pineapple in syrup or pineapple juice is a very different product wearing the same name. Here's a question worth answering honestly. When you eat pineapple, is it usually fresh, or does it tend to come from a can or a glass of juice? Number 4 and number 3. Apple and blueberries paired together, since both land in a similar low glycemic load range and share the exact same underlying lesson. An apple's real advantage comes from pectin, a soluble fiber concentrated right under the skin, which slows sugar absorption significantly. Blueberries carry their own advantage in anthocyanins, the deep blue-purple pigment packed into the skin, which has been associated with improved insulin sensitivity in research looking at blueberry compounds specifically. Both fruits earn their low glycemic load honestly, through genuine fiber content and skin-concentrated compounds doing real metabolic work. Here's the FOMO trigger worth paying attention to, because it applies to both of these fruits almost identically. Peel an apple and you've removed most of the pectin along with a meaningful share of its beneficial plant compounds, leaving mostly sugar behind. Turn either fruit into juice or blend blueberries into a smoothie. And you've done something even more damaging, stripping the fiber out entirely while leaving the sugar fully intact, which lets it hit your bloodstream far faster than the whole fruit ever would. Bake blueberries into a muffin loaded with refined flour and added sugar, and whatever benefit the anthocyanins were offering gets buried underneath everything surrounding it. This is exactly how two genuinely excellent fruits for blood sugar can quietly get canceled out before they ever reach your body the way they're supposed to. The fruit itself was never the problem. The processing is what strips away the exact mechanism that made it beneficial in the first place. The fix for both is almost insultingly simple. Apple, eaten whole with the skin on. Blueberries, eaten whole, fresh or frozen, not blended, not baked, not buried under a bowl of sweetened cereal. Here's a question worth answering honestly. Do you usually eat your apples and blueberries whole? Or do they tend to show up in your day as juice, a smoothie, or baked into something else? Number 2, watermelon. And this is exactly where the setup from earlier pays off. Watermelon has a reputation problem, not a science problem. Its glycemic index sits around 72, technically higher than a spoonful of table sugar, which is exactly why so many lists rank it near the very bottom, right alongside the fruits you genuinely want to limit. But that number alone tells you almost nothing about what actually happens once you eat a real serving. Watermelon is roughly 90% water. A typical portion contains very little actual carbohydrate compared to almost every other fruit on this list. Once you calculate the glycemic load, factoring in that low carbohydrate density, watermelon drops dramatically, landing among the lowest scores of any common fruit, well below mango, pineapple, and especially banana. This is the contrast worth sitting with directly. Watermelon and banana have spent years occupying completely different reputations. Watermelon treated with suspicion, banana treated as a safe, sensible choice. Based on real glycemic load, that reputation has it almost exactly backwards. The fruit everyone warns you about turns out to be one of the safer choices on this entire list, while the fruit nobody thinks twice about carries the highest load of anything we've covered today. This doesn't mean watermelon is flawless or that portion size stops mattering entirely. A very large amount eaten in one sitting still adds up. But as a typical serving, watermelon earns its spot near the top of this list, honestly. Not because it's trendy or fashionable, but because the actual math behind glycemic load supports it clearly. Here's a question worth answering honestly. Now that you know this, does it change how you'll think about watery fruits like watermelon or cantaloupe the next time you're deciding what to eat? Number 1, grapefruit. And this is where the top spot on this list carries something more important than the ranking itself. Grapefruit lands with the lowest glycemic load of anything we've covered today, well below even watermelon. Part of what makes grapefruit genuinely effective for blood sugar is naringenin, a bitter flavonoid responsible for its sharp taste, which has been associated with improved insulin sensitivity in research looking at citrus compounds specifically. Combined with its low natural sugar content, grapefruit earns the top spot on real numbers, not reputation. But there's something about grapefruit that has nothing to do with blood sugar at all. And it matters enough that it needs its own moment here. Grapefruit affects an enzyme in your gut called CYP3A4, an enzyme your body relies on to break down a long list of common medications, including many statins prescribed for cholesterol and several blood pressure medications. When grapefruit interferes with that enzyme, those medications can build up in your bloodstream to levels they were never intended to reach. And this interaction is well documented, not a minor or theoretical concern. This isn't medical advice, and it's not a reason to fear grapefruit generally. It's a reason to check first if it applies to you. If you take a statin or a blood pressure medication, the responsible step is a single phone call to your pharmacist, asking directly whether your specific medication is affected. That's a 5-minute conversation that removes all the guesswork rather than assuming either way. If none of that applies to you, grapefruit is genuinely one of the best choices on this entire list. And half of one in the morning, eaten in segments rather than juiced, keeps its fiber intact and its impact on your blood sugar minimal. Here's a question worth answering honestly. If you take a statin or blood pressure medication, have you ever actually asked your pharmacist whether grapefruit is safe for you, or has it just never come up? Here's the number 7 all over again. Except this time you actually know why it earns that spot. Ripe banana carries the highest glycemic load of anything on this list. Mango and pineapple sit moderate. Apple and blueberries earn their low scores honestly through fiber and skin-concentrated compounds, and watermelon, the fruit everyone's been warned about for years, turns out to be nearly as good as grapefruit, which takes the top spot outright. The real twist underneath all of it comes down to one distinction almost no ranking online actually makes. Glycemic Index tells you how fast something raises your blood sugar. Glycemic Load tells you how much it actually raises it once you factor in what a real serving contains. Watermelon looked dangerous on the index and turned out to be one of the safest choices once you looked at the load. Banana looked moderate and turned out to be the one worth watching most closely. We've now covered blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, metabolic age, the fat your body hides deepest of all, and now the fruit ranking almost every list online gets backwards. Each of these has followed the same pattern, taking a number or a ranking everyone assumes they already understand, and showing you the part that was never actually explained. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Out of these 7 fruits, which one surprised you the most? Watermelon for how low it landed, or banana for how high? I read every single comment, and it genuinely shapes which numbers, rankings, and hidden truths we uncover next. If this changed how you'll think about a fruit bowl the next time you're deciding what to eat, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. If you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you in the next video.